There's something strangely creepy about school buses. They're supposed to be safe, filled with kids and laughter, but sometimes they become the setting for horror stories. Over the years, people have shared some truly unsettling experiences connected to school buses. And honestly, the more you hear them, the harder it is to look at those yellow buses the same way again. I've gathered 5 of the most horrifying true school bus stories. Some involve mysterious strangers, others tragic accidents, and a few remain unexplained to this day. These aren't just urban legends. They're based on real events and eyewitness accounts. That's what makes them so chilling. When you think about it, school buses are kind of isolated. Once you're on the road, it's just the driver, the kids, and whatever happens outside. And if something goes wrong, help isn't always close. That's probably why these stories stick with me. They remind us how fragile safety can be. Now, I should warn you, some of these stories might make you uneasy. They're not full of gore, but the thought of them happening is enough to keep you up at night. Still, they deserve to be told, because behind every school bus route, there's a chance for something unpredictable to unfold. So buckle up, because tonight, we're diving into 5 horrifying school bus stories you shouldn't watch alone. Let us start with the first story, a bus ride that turned into a nightmare because of what the kids saw on the road. It was late autumn, and a rural school bus was making its usual evening drop-offs. The ride was quiet. Just a few kids left, watching the fog roll across the fields. The driver slowed near a bend in the road when something appeared in the headlights, a figure standing perfectly still in the middle of the lane. At first, the kids thought it was someone waiting for help, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, head tilted slightly as the bus crawled closer. The driver honked, but the figure didn't react. That's when one of the kids whispered, "Why aren't they moving?" The driver pulled the bus to a stop. The figure was still there, just 10 feet ahead, completely motionless. It looked like a person dressed in dark clothing, but something about the way they stood was off. Too stiff, almost unnatural. One of the kids swore they saw the figure's head snap to the side, like it had just noticed them. The others ducked down in fear. The driver, trying to stay calm, turned on the high beams. But in that moment, the figure vanished. Not walked away, vanished. The kids screamed. The driver hit the gas, swerving around where the figure had been. When they looked back, the road was empty. Just fog and darkness swallowing the bus's taillights. The children begged the driver not to stop until they were home. She nodded, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. One boy insisted he had seen the figure smiling just before it disappeared. None of the others wanted to believe him. When they finally reached the last stop, the driver told the kids to run straight home and lock their doors. Later, she reported the encounter to local police. They searched the road but found nothing. No footprints, no person, nothing at all. Some locals claimed it was a prank, but the driver swore the figure hadn't moved like a normal human. And what really haunted her was the way it disappeared instantly under the headlights, like it had never been there. The kids on that bus never forgot the night. Even years later, they said riding that stretch of road still gave them chills. One girl admitted she refused to sit near the front after that, afraid she'd see something waiting in the headlights again. The story spread through the town, becoming a kind of local legend. Parents warned kids not to walk that road after dark. Some said the figure was a restless spirit. Others believed it was something worse, something that fed on fear. The driver eventually quit her job. She claimed she could still see that figure in her dreams, standing in the road, waiting. Whether it was real or not, one thing was certain. No one looked at those foggy autumn nights the same way again. I can't help but wonder what the kids really saw. Was it a trick of the light, or something beyond explanation? Whatever it was, it turned an ordinary bus ride into a story none of them would ever forget. That was just the first story. And as creepy as it is, the next one involves not just a figure on the road, but an entire bus that went missing for hours. Imagine waiting for your child to come home, only to learn the bus never arrived. Parents lived that nightmare in the second story, and the explanation they got didn't make things any less chilling. because sometimes what happens on a school bus can't be explained at all. The strangest part, no one on board could agree on what really happened. Let's move into story number 2, the mystery of the bus that disappeared. It happened in the late 1970s in a quiet rural town. A school bus carrying nearly 20 children simply failed to arrive home one afternoon. At first, parents thought there had been a delay. Maybe the bus broke down or took a detour. But hours passed with no word. Panic spread quickly. Police were called, roads were searched, and parents gathered at the school desperate for answers. Then, just after midnight, the bus reappeared. It pulled into the depot as if nothing had happened. The driver looked pale and shaken, while the kids sat quietly, refusing to speak. When questioned, the driver insisted he hadn't realized so much time had passed. He thought the ride had been normal, but the children told a different story. Some claimed the bus had gone down a road they didn't recognize, surrounded by thick fog. Others swore they'd seen strange lights outside the windows, glowing in the sky and moving alongside the bus. One boy whispered that the bus had stopped in a place where there were no houses, no people, just silence. And then, suddenly, they were back on the main road, as if nothing had happened. Police searched the bus for signs of tampering but found nothing unusual. The fuel level even matched a normal route. Parents pressed their kids for answers, but most refused to talk about it. Some even cried whenever the subject came up. The driver eventually resigned, saying he could no longer explain what he had experienced. Locals came up with theories. Some said it was mass hysteria. Others claimed it was a case of lost time, something paranormal. The strangest detail, watches worn by the kids and the driver all stopped working during the missing hours. When they started ticking again, the hands all pointed to the exact same time. To this day, no one knows what really happened during those missing hours. Some believe the bus slipped into a different reality, even if only for a short while. Whatever the truth, the story haunted that small town for decades. Parents began driving their kids instead of relying on buses, afraid history might repeat itself. And the children who were on that bus grew up with a memory they could never fully explain. Some of them admitted later that they still had nightmares about the foggy road. It became one of those stories people whispered about, but never truly understood. The official explanation was a delay and driver confusion. But nobody who lived through it believed that. Because how do you explain 2 decades of kids who swore something impossible had happened? And how do you explain the watches? That mystery has never been solved, and maybe it never will. Which makes me wonder, what really happened during those missing hours on that school bus? It's the kind of story that makes you uneasy the next time you see a bus disappear down a foggy road. That was the second story. Creepy, right? But the third one takes us from strange mysteries into something more terrifying, an actual intruder on a school bus. Because while ghosts and foggy roads are scary enough, sometimes the most horrifying danger is human. And for one group of kids, that danger climbed right onto their bus. It started as a normal morning pickup. Nothing unusual until a stranger stepped inside. The driver assumed it was a new parent or substitute helper, but within seconds, she realized something was very wrong. The man wasn't there to help. He was there for something else entirely. The kids grew quiet as the atmosphere changed. Even at their age, they knew this wasn't normal. What followed was a terrifying ride no one on that bus would ever forget. And it's a story that proves sometimes reality can be far scarier than the supernatural. Let's move into story number 3. The man who shouldn't have been there, and what he did once he stepped onto that school bus. It was an ordinary morning route. Kids climbed onto the bus with backpacks and sleepy faces, chatting about homework and weekend plans. But at the third stop, someone unexpected stepped inside. A man, not a student, not a parent, just a stranger in a dark coat. The driver froze. He hadn't been told to expect anyone. The man smiled faintly, but it didn't feel friendly. "Mind if I ride along?" the man asked. His tone was casual, but his eyes never left the children. The driver hesitated. Something about the man's presence felt wrong. but she didn't want to alarm the kids. She replied firmly, "This bus is for students only." But the man ignored her and walked down the aisle. The kids grew silent, their usual chatter replaced by nervous whispers. The man sat halfway back, staring out the window, but every so often his eyes flicked to the children. The driver radioed for help, but the signal was weak. Out here, the bus often lost connection. She tried to stay calm, driving toward the next stop as if nothing was wrong. One brave student whispered, "Miss, I don't like him. Who is he?" She shushed them quickly, not wanting to escalate things. At the next stop, parents were waiting. The man didn't move. He just sat, staring straight ahead. The driver thought quickly. She stepped off the bus, whispered to a parent, and pointed subtly toward the man. Within minutes, police were called. The man finally rose from his seat and began walking toward the front. The kids tensed, clutching their bags, eyes wide with fear. He leaned toward the driver and said softly, "You shouldn't be out here alone." Before she could respond, flashing lights appeared ahead. Police cars blocked the road. The man bolted, shoving past the driver and leaping from the bus. He vanished into the woods before anyone could grab him. Officers searched for hours, but he was never found. The children were shaken. Some cried, others refused to get back on the bus for weeks. The driver blamed herself for letting him step on in the first place, but no one truly knew what he had wanted. Rumors spread. Some said he was just a drifter. Others whispered darker possibilities. What unsettled everyone most was his parting words. "You shouldn't be out here alone." Was it a warning? A threat? No one could say. From then on, extra precautions were taken. Doors locked, radios checked, and no strangers allowed near the bus. But the memory stayed. Children often asked, "What if he comes back?" He never did. Yet the thought of him lurking somewhere nearby haunted the town. It wasn't a ghost story. It wasn't folklore. It was real, and that made it scarier than anything else. Sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones in the dark. They re the ones who step onto a bus in broad daylight. That was the third story. But the fourth is even more unsettling, because it doesn't involve a stranger outside. It's about something terrifying happening inside the bus itself. This one comes from a driver who swore she saw something impossible while looking into the rearview mirror. It started like every normal afternoon, until she realized not all the faces in her mirror belonged to her students. She thought she was imagining things at first. But as the ride continued, the truth became harder to ignore. Because sitting in the very back row, she saw someone who shouldn't have been there at all. And the scariest part? The kids swore that seat was empty. She checked again and again. Every time the figure appeared in her mirror. But when she turned around, it was gone. The ride grew tense. She stopped the bus, walked the aisle, counted every student. Everything was normal. But when she sat down and looked in the mirror, the shadowy figure was back, smiling faintly. The rest of that drive became one of the longest and most horrifying trips of her career, and it left her with a question she never answered. What or who was riding in her bus that day? The driver, Mrs. Keller, had been working her route for nearly 15 years. She knew every kid, every stop, and every usual distraction. Nothing surprised her anymore. But one afternoon, as she glanced at her mirror, she noticed a face she didn't recognize in the back row. It was faint, almost like a shadow, but clearly smiling. She blinked, thinking it was just a trick of the light. She looked again. Still there. Dark eyes, pale skin, and that unsettling grin. Her heart raced. She counted heads quickly. Every student matched her roster. The back row was supposed to be empty. She pulled the bus over, walked the aisle, and checked. No one was there. The seats were empty, untouched. But when she sat back down and checked the mirror again, the face was back. This time, its head tilted slowly, almost as if mocking her. She didn't want to scare the kids, so she kept driving, gripping the wheel tighter than ever. Every few minutes, she glanced at the mirror. Sometimes the face was gone. Sometimes it appeared again, always in that same spot. At one stop, a little girl asked why Mrs. Keller looked so pale. The driver forced a smile and told her she was fine. But inside, she was anything but fine. When the last student got off, Mrs. Keller parked the bus and turned fully around. The back row was empty. Relieved, she began cleaning the bus. But as she turned, she caught a reflection in the window. The same face, staring at her from inside. She screamed, dropping her clipboard, but when she looked back, the window showed nothing but her own reflection. From that day on, she refused to use that bus unless absolutely necessary. She claimed it was haunted. Some of her coworkers laughed, but other drivers admitted they'd felt strange chills when driving it too. A mechanic even reported hearing footsteps inside the bus while he worked underneath it. No one could explain it, and the haunted bus became a local legend among both drivers and kids. The district quietly retired the bus a few years later, saying it was too old for service. But Mrs. Keller always believed they got rid of it for another reason. She swore what she saw wasn't her imagination. She still insists there had been someone, or something, riding with her. Some kids claim that if you sit in the back row of certain buses at night, you can still see a shadow in the window. Maybe it's just a story passed down, but every legend starts somewhere. And Mrs. Keller's story was too vivid to dismiss. That was story number 4. Creepy enough to make you glance twice the next time you ride a bus at night. But the 5th and final story is perhaps the most disturbing, because it doesn't involve ghosts, shadows, or strangers. It's about a tragedy. A moment that turned a normal school day into something unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. This one has been told in whispers for decades, usually as a cautionary tale to new drivers. It begins with a bus crossing a set of railroad tracks. At first glance, everything seemed routine. Kids laughing, the driver focused on the road, nothing unusual at all. But a single mistake turned that ordinary trip into disaster. Some people say the story was exaggerated. Others swear it happened exactly as told. Either way, it left behind a chilling reminder that school buses aren't invincible. The driver thought the tracks were clear. She didn't see the train in time. What happened next became one of the most horrifying school bus legends ever shared. And even today, drivers are told to stop, look, and listen at every crossing because of this story. It's a tale that mixes tragedy, rumor, and superstition all into one. And whether every detail is true or not, the fear it carries has never faded. Let's move into the 5th and final story, the bus at the railroad crossing, and the reason why so many towns still whisper about it decades later. It was a chilly morning, and a school bus full of children approached the railroad tracks just outside a small town. The driver slowed, as always, but for some reason that day she didn't come to a full stop. Some say she thought the tracks were clear. Others believe she misjudged the distance of the oncoming train. In an instant, the mistake became catastrophic. A train roared into view, horn blaring, far too close to stop. Witnesses later said the sound was deafening, metal screaming against metal as the train slammed into the bus. The aftermath was devastating. Dozens of children lost their lives and the town was left in grief for years. But from that tragedy came a legend that spread far beyond the town's borders. Locals claimed that if you stopped your car at those tracks, strange things would happen. Drivers reported their vehicles rolling forward on their own, as if invisible hands were pushing them across the tracks. Others swore they heard faint laughter or the sound of children's voices whispering in the wind. The creepiest part? Some said if you dusted baby powder on your car bumper, you'd find tiny handprints afterward. People believed it was the spirits of the children, protecting anyone who stopped at the track so no one else would meet the same fate. Of course, skeptics argued it was just gravity, a slight incline in the road giving the illusion of movement. But believers didn't care. For them, the legend wasn't just a ghost story. It was a memorial. The town eventually rerouted the tracks, but the legend lived on. Even today, ghost hunters visit the site, hoping to witness the mysterious push of their cars across the rails. For the families who lost loved ones, the story was bittersweet. Tragedy gave birth to a tale of protection, even if it came from beyond. That was the fifth and final story. And honestly, it's the one that still gives me chills because it blends real heartbreak with something unexplainable. Maybe it's just a legend, or maybe some tragedies leave a mark so strong they echo forever. Either way, it's a story that ensures we never forget the lives lost on that school bus. And there you have it. 5 horrifying school bus stories that prove even the most ordinary rides can turn into something unforgettable. From strange figures on the road to buses that disappeared, and even tragedies that turned into ghostly legends, these stories remind us how fragile safety can be. Some of them may sound like folklore, others like unsolved mysteries, but all of them leave behind that uneasy feeling you just can't shake off. And maybe that's the scariest part, because when it comes to school buses, we expect normal routines, not nightmares. But sometimes, the things we trust the most become the stage for stories we wish we could forget. Whether you believe in ghosts, legends, or just strange coincidences, these tales are unsettling for a reason, because at the heart of each one, there's a reminder. Safety isn't guaranteed, not even on a yellow bus filled with kids. So, tell me, which of these 5 stories creeped you out the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss more creepy true stories every week. Thanks for watching, and remember, next time you see a school bus driving past, maybe glance twice, because you never know what stories are unfolding inside.